Okay, so before we start, I need you to understand something. Every single one of these stories was typed out by a real person, on a real account, knowing that strangers all over the world were about to read it. And they still did it. And some of these confessions, I genuinely have to close my laptop and go touch some grass after reading them. Today we're going through 10 of the most wild, the most jaw-dropping, and honestly sometimes the most heartbreaking confessions that real humans have posted on the internet. I'll tell you right up front, a couple of these get pretty heavy. I'll warn you before each one, so you can skip ahead if you need to. We're literally just reading what these people chose to share publicly. Alright, let's get into it. This one I need you to really sit with because on the surface it sounds almost too dramatic to be real. But the person who shared it wasn't sharing it as a dramatic story. They shared it as something they were genuinely struggling to process, and that's what makes it land. A Reddit user's wife worked as a care worker in a nursing home. Day-to-day stuff, supporting elderly residents, end-of-life care, the kind of work that is invisible and exhausting and rarely talked about. There was one resident in particular, an elderly woman. Quiet, by all accounts a gentle, unremarkable person, somebody's grandmother, somebody's neighbor. What most people in the facility didn't know was that she had spent her career decades earlier as a nurse in a maternity ward, through the 70s and into the 80s, delivering babies, a job that back then involved handling newborns in the chaotic hours right after birth, the tagging, the wrapping, the moving between mothers and nurseries. She was close to the end when this happened. Barely conscious. The care worker was leaning in to tend to her when the old woman suddenly gripped her arm with this urgency that the care worker said came from nowhere and whispered something into her ear. She said while she worked in that ward, she switched babies. And then she let go and closed her eyes, and that was the last coherent thing she ever said. No names, no dates, no explanation of how many, no reason given, just that sentence delivered like something that had been pressing against the inside of her chest for 40 years and finally found a way out in those last few seconds. The care worker went home that night and couldn't sleep. And the reason she couldn't sleep, the reason this post stayed in the top of that Reddit thread for so long, isn't just the horror of what that woman did, it's the math of what comes after it. Somewhere out there are adults, middle-aged people, maybe older, who were raised by a family that biologically isn't theirs, who inherited medical histories that don't belong to them, who maybe have health conditions that seem to come from nowhere because the family history they were given was never actually their own. Who might have siblings they've never met, parents they've never known existed, and the only person who had the full picture just took every single detail of it into wherever she went next. There is something so uniquely uncomfortable about this one that I almost don't know how to set it up, because it's terrible and also, somewhere underneath all of it, you can almost see why it's darkly funny in the worst possible way. So, someone posted this in the same deathbed confessions thread that went viral a couple of years back. It got tens of thousands of interactions, and out of everything in that thread, this particular reply was one of the most shared. Their uncle got very sick during COVID. 2020, the really scary early part, before there was much in the way of treatment, when being hospitalized with it genuinely felt like it could be the end. And this uncle, lying there not knowing what was going to happen, made a decision. He decided he didn't want to die with this on his conscience, so he told the family. He had been having a relationship with another woman, and not just a relationship, he had 2 children with her, a second family, completely separate. Nobody in his immediate world, not his wife, not his kids, not his siblings, not anyone, had ever known. He got it all out, unburdened himself completely, did the whole dramatic deathbed confession. And then he got better. He survived COVID, went home and had to wake up every single morning inside the absolute wreckage of everything he had just voluntarily set on fire. The person posting this said that at the time they wrote it, which was years after the fact, the drama in the family had not stopped. There were inheritance disputes, legal questions about the children he'd fathered with this other woman and what they were entitled to. There were relationships between people who had suddenly found out they were half-siblings that nobody knew how to navigate. The entire family's internal structure had been cracked open, and nobody knew quite how to put it back. And the uncle is still alive, living inside all of it. The original commenter added a note at the end of their post. They said, and this detail alone is what made it go so viral. Yes, it absolutely is hysterical that he got a second chance to live after admitting to having a second family. Okay, change of pace, because not every confession is sinister. Some of them are just genuinely unhinged in the most entertaining way possible. This one comes from Reddit and went completely viral when it was posted because it taps into something that literally every single person who has ever worked a corporate job has thought about at least once. A man posted that he had been hired for an administrative role at a large real estate company. Normal enough. He had a start date. He showed up. Day one, someone from another department waved him toward a desk. That was it. No welcome meeting, no manager to report to, no laptop setup, no system login, no onboarding. Just a desk, a chair, and silence. He waited. His manager, the person who had actually hired him, had been let go right before he started. And with that manager gone, apparently nobody in the entire organization knew this guy existed. He had simply fallen through the cracks of the company's HR system like a piece of paper that slips behind a filing cabinet. So he did what any reasonable person would do. He emailed around, asked who he was supposed to report to, tried to flag that nobody had given him anything to do. Nobody responded. So he waited some more, and kept waiting. He set himself a little routine, came into the office 3 days a week just to look present, worked from home the other 2. His only actual task was sending a weekly payroll spreadsheet to a manager's email address he'd been given. He sent it every single week. That manager never replied, not once. The total time he spent actually working each week, he said about 15 minutes. The rest of the time he was reading, watching videos, and, in his own words, unapologetically doing absolutely nothing. 7 months passed. 7 months of full salary, benefits, direct deposit, for 15 minutes of spreadsheet work a week. He posted about it not because he'd been caught, but because he couldn't believe it was still happening. The comments exploded. Other people started sharing similar stories. Someone else posted about earning $80,000 a year at a telecom company where their job technically existed, but their actual workload was 1 or 2 calls per week. They told their manager. Their manager had said, and I love this, "Our rating system is near perfect. Don't stir the pot." So they didn't. For 5 years. The guy who started the thread said he was a, quote, self-declared slacker, and that he had zero intention of flagging the situation again. Some people in the comments called it fraud. Most people said the company created the situation. All right, back to the unsettling ones. And this chapter is probably the one most people already half know about, because it spread everywhere when it first appeared. But most people only know the headline. They don't know the full context, and the full context is so much worse. A young woman started noticing things in her apartment, and at first, these things were so small, so easy to explain away, that she didn't even mention them to anyone. An object on her desk that she was almost certain she'd left in a different position. A smell she couldn't quite identify that came and went. Nothing solid, nothing she could point to. But then she started feeling strange in her own home. Not anxious exactly, she described it more like a low-level wrong feeling, like something was off that she couldn't name. And she started waking up at odd hours feeling like she hadn't slept properly, feeling heavy and foggy in a way that didn't match how much rest she'd gotten. She figured it was stress. She lived alone, she was busy, maybe she was just burning out. Then she started posting on Reddit, just venting really, asking if anyone had tips for apartment anxiety, saying she kept hearing sounds inside the walls. And Reddit, being Reddit, did not let it go. People started asking very specific, very pointed questions. Does your building have a crawl space? Has anyone else had access to your unit? Is there a ventilation system that connects to another unit? Has your landlord ever come in unannounced? Someone suggested she do a full sweep of her apartment, check every closet, every cabinet, look at the vents properly, check if there were any spaces that were bigger on the outside of the building than inside of her apartment suggested. She did. What she found was that there was a concealed space behind one of her walls, and that the landlord's son had been using it. He had access to the building, he had a way in, and based on what investigators later found, he had been entering her apartment while she slept.
The drowsiness wasn't burnout. The foggy, heavy sleep wasn't stress. He'd been in there with her. The question that people couldn't stop coming back to in the comments, and honestly the question that will probably stay with you too, is how long before she started posting had this already been happening? She noticed things being moved. She had been feeling off for a while before she said anything online. The answer to how long is something nobody has a clean answer to.
This one is going to make you feel things you weren't expecting to feel in a video about Reddit confessions. Fair warning. Same thread, same pile of deathbed stories, but this one went in a completely different direction. A Reddit user's grandmother had dementia. Late stage, the kind where whole chapters of a life simply vanish. Names, faces, facts that have been known for decades just quietly disappear, like pages being torn out of a book one by one. The grandchild was visiting, sitting with her. And suddenly, the grandmother got very serious, very urgent. She grabbed them and pulled them close like she had something critically important to say, something she had been holding on to and needed to release before it was too late. She told them they were adopted. She was terrified of how this would land. She kept saying it gently, carefully. Don't be upset with your parents. They love you. It doesn't change anything. You need to know the truth. I can't leave without you knowing. Here's the thing. The grandchild already knew, had always known. Had known their entire life because, and the person explained this in their post, they're Korean. Their sister, also adopted, is from Mexico. Their parents are white. This was not a secret. It was simply a family fact as ordinary to them as their own birthday. But the dementia had taken it. Somewhere in the fog of her illness, the grandmother had lost the memory that the grandchild had been told. And all that remained was this raw, frightened need to make sure her grandchild wasn't living in the dark. So the grandchild sat with her and let her believe she was doing something brave and necessary, made all the right reassurances, said, of course I'm not upset, of course I still love my parents, thank you for telling me, and just held her hand through it. That image of someone choosing to let another person protect them from something they stopped needing protection from years ago, just because it clearly mattered so much to her, I don't know, that one just sticks. We went heavy for a while. Let's do another one of these, because this category of confession, the I found the gap in the system and I'm not telling a single soul confession, keeps reappearing on Reddit over and over, and every time it gets hundreds of thousands of upvotes, because people either relate to it or they're absolutely losing their minds with jealousy, and both. This particular post went massively viral on Reddit's r/anti-work. A man worked as an account manager for a telecom company. The job involved being assigned the portfolio of clients who could call in with questions or problems. Simple enough. His company used a rating system to distribute clients. Each client got a score from 1 to 10 based on how complex and difficult they were. His manager assigned clients to different account managers based on those ratings. Somehow, and he never fully understood why, he ended up with the easiest possible portfolio. Clients who essentially never called. He got 1, maybe 2 calls per week, sometimes fewer. He mentioned this to his manager early on. The manager looked at the rating, said the system was near perfect, and told him not to stir the pot. So he didn't. That was 5 years ago. At the time of posting, he was earning $80,000 a year, getting a 5% raise annually, and working from home full-time. His last actual support call was 9 days before he wrote the post. 9 days! His day-to-day involved browsing the internet, attending the occasional meeting, and that was genuinely it. He wasn't gloating exactly, more like processing the absurdity of the situation out loud. He said he would keep going until he gets caught or something better came along. And the comments were enormous. Thousands of people, some angry, a lot of people sharing their own version of the same story, managers who told them to stay quiet, systems so broken that entire human beings had effectively been forgotten by the organizations paying them. And the whole thread just quietly made the point that the relationship between how hard you work and how much you earn is a lot more random than anyone wants to admit. I want to be straightforward with you before this one. This chapter is hard. Not in a gory way, not in a disturbing details way. Hard in a grinding, slow, suffocating way. The kind that reflects a real experience that a lot of people have lived through and almost never see described accurately. A woman posted about a man from her past, someone she'd been at school with. Not an ex, not someone she'd ever dated or encouraged, someone who had simply decided, on his own, that she was the focal point of his obsession. It started the way these things usually do. Small things, showing up in places he shouldn't have known she'd be, comments that revealed he knew more about her movements than he should. The feeling, gradual and then suddenly very certain, that she was being watched. She tried to manage it, put distance between them, eventually transferred schools entirely, moved her whole life somewhere new, started over. About a year later, emails. He had found her. The first ones read like apologies, soft-toned, reasonable-seeming almost. Then they shifted. Requests for her social media handles, then demands, then something that sat in a different category altogether. She didn't respond. She went silent. She blocked everything she could find. It didn't stop. He found the woman she'd been in a relationship with, tracked her down at her place of work. Security had to be involved. That was the first escalation that moved off a screen and into the physical world. Then he found her brother, showed up at his college, another confrontation. More people pulled into a situation that had nothing to do with them. Then the brother's workplace, a physical altercation that required intervention. And then, and this is the part that spread the furthest when the story was shared, out of options, locked out of every account she had, he made a new one. Not as himself. He impersonated his own therapist, created a fake professional identity, a name, a credential, an email address that looked legitimate, and attempted to reach her through that, hoping she wouldn't recognize where it was coming from. He built a fake person to use as a tool to get around her. She reported it every step of the way, called the police multiple times, was told repeatedly that there wasn't enough to act on yet. The system she kept turning to for help kept telling her to come back when it got worse. It got worse. The Ori story ends with a legal outcome, a court record. The original poster described it as grim but final. What she said at the end of her post wasn't rage, it was exhaustion. She said, "I want people to understand what this actually looks like." This isn't a crime of passion. This is a crime of obsession and patience. So this story surfaced in one of Reddit's biggest ever Ask Reddit threads. Someone asked, "What's the creepiest confession you've ever seen posted online?" And out of thousands and thousands of responses, this one kept getting referenced again and again. People couldn't stop talking about it because the more you think about it, the worse it gets. There was a man, and he became completely, totally, obsessively fixated on a woman. Not in a "I have feelings for her" kind of way. More like a "I have decided this person will be mine and I am going to engineer that outcome" kind of way. He started by watching her, learning her daily patterns, figuring out who she spent time with, who she trusted, and most importantly, who she had actual romantic feelings for. Because there was someone, there was a man she genuinely liked, and that man was standing in the way. So here's what he did. He hacked into that man's computer, got full access, and then he didn't just snoop around, he planted evidence. Carefully crafted files, digital breadcrumbs that made it look like this other man was a dangerous one, made it look like he was the one doing the stalking, the obsessing, the threatening. Then, once the picture was painted, he stepped in, the caring friend, the shoulder to cry on. He helped her report it, helped her get a restraining order filed against the very man he had completely framed. And then, once that man was out of the picture entirely, he pursued her. She fell for him. And they got married. She never found out. As far as we know, she still hasn't. The person who originally shared the story said they found it posted in a confession thread, and that the original poster described the whole thing almost clinically, like they were proud of the logistics, like it was a problem they had solved. And that's the part that really sits with you, isn't it? Not just that it happened, but that whoever this man is, he's out there right now, living a completely normal life. Probably a good husband by all visible measures, and his wife has absolutely no idea who she's actually with. This one came from r/true off my chest. If you haven't been to that subreddit, it's different from a lot of Reddit. It's not for advice, it's not for debate, it's just people saying things they have never said anywhere else. And occasionally something gets posted there that just cuts right through. This man wrote that he had been in a relationship for years, lived with his partner, built a full life with them. From the outside, everything looked completely normal, completely fine. A couple, a home, a routine. But he had a secret he'd been keeping since before the relationship even really started. He didn't feel the way his partner believed he felt. The love, the romantic, deep, chosen kind, wasn't there. He had known for a long time, maybe always if he was being honest. But every time he had gotten close to ending things, his partner had made clear that they couldn't survive it, not as a figure of speech, as a real direct statement about what they would do to themselves if he left. And so he stayed. Not because he chose to, because he was terrified of what would happen the moment he walked out the door. He became, without wanting to be, someone else's reason not to fall apart, and he couldn't leave without that falling apart happening. Years went by. They eventually separated. He described this without much detail, just that it finally happened. He wrote the post a long time after the fact. What he was putting into words, maybe for the first time publicly, wasn't the guilt about the relationship ending. It was the weight of a very specific kind of trapped feeling that almost nobody talks about, of having your own life held in place, not by a choice you made, but by someone else's fragility, of playing a role you never auditioned for because the alternative felt impossible. The response to that post was enormous, not because it was dramatic, but because so many people wrote in the comments, "I have been exactly here. I have never seen anyone describe this before." Last one, and I want to be clear before we get into it. This isn't a story about a bad person. This is a story about a person in pain saying something that our society has made almost completely impossible to admit, and what happened when she finally said it. A woman posted on Reddit, throwaway account, the kind people make when they need to say something they cannot attach to their real name. She wrote that she regrets having her child. She described it carefully and at length. She talked about the pregnancy feeling like a decision made in a version of herself that no longer existed, about the postpartum period where she waited for the wave of love she'd been told was coming, the automatic, overwhelming, undeniable bond, and waited, and kept waiting. And it didn't arrive, not the way she expected. What she felt instead was obligation, responsibility without the feeling underneath it, going through the motions of motherhood while watching other people seem to feel it effortlessly and not understanding what was wrong with her. She said she loved her child. She wasn't abandoning anyone, wasn't neglecting anyone. She was showing up every single day. But the experience of motherhood felt like a door that had closed behind her, and she could never go back to who she was before she walked through it. She said she felt like a monster for feeling any of this. She posted it expecting to be destroyed. She said she had prepared herself mentally for the comments, had already decided she would read them and accept whatever came. The post got over 18,000 upvotes, and the comments were not what she expected. There were parents, dozens and dozens of them, saying quietly, "Me too. I have never told anyone this." Therapists writing that this experience is far more common than is ever acknowledged publicly, that the pressure to perform joy at all times in parenthood creates a silence around the reality of what a lot of people actually feel. People who had grown up with parents who clearly felt this way, not as an accusation, but as a kind of recognition, saying, "I always knew, and I'm glad you're being honest about it instead of just going cold." She came back to the post later and left a comment. She said she was shocked. She said it was the first time in months she had felt like something other than a deeply broken person. That's it. That's the whole thing. A woman typed the truth she'd been most ashamed of. That's what these places are for, I think. 10 stories. 10 people who sat somewhere, probably late at night, probably alone, and typed out the most honest thing they had ever put into words. Some of them are chilling. Some are the kind of thing you'll be thinking about 3 days from now at 2 a.m. One of them is honestly a little bit funny, and a couple of them might have hit closer to home than you expected. But all of them are real. All of them were said by actual human beings who needed somewhere to put what they were carrying. The internet does a lot of terrible things, but occasionally it does this. It gives people a place to finally be honest. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, someone on the other side reads it and thinks, "I've been there too." Drop in the comments which one stayed with you the longest. I read everything.